the owner and founder of Growing Perspectives Career Consulting Company, where I specialize in supporting early and mid career professionals to successfully transition through their careers, support leaders to grow and further develop their skills, and provide customized training to teams and groups, all around strengthening your team. You can follow me on social media on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook, and I'm committed to your success. And I have a passion for supporting your growth and supporting you to thrive in your career. Thank you for joining today. This is Kaisha McCrae, and I am happy that you've decided to listen to Growing Perspectives with Kaisha. I'm happy today to have a guest, and her name is Leigh Lyons. And Leigh is going to share so much about her background, her journey, and what she's doing next, which is very exciting. So I'm going to pause. I'll tell you a little bit of how the two of us met a few years ago. But first, I'm going to actually tell us a little bit about what you're doing today and how did you start into HR, human resources. I started in HR, as you know, many years ago, and in the latter part of my career, I decided to specialize in employee relations of HR, and focusing on conflict, because conflict typically makes people uncomfortable. And so I started an LLC, Lions HR Consulting, a few years ago to try so that I can work with organizations and individuals who may require individual coaching on how to tackle conflict. That's a big word, conflict. So, how does conflict show up in the workplace? Like, what are some examples? Oh my gosh, there's so many ways. Um, Conflict can come up between an employee or a supervisor, typically over performance, job performance. And a supervisor may have expectations. The employee doesn't have a clue what those expectations might be. Theirs may be totally separate. And during performance evaluation time, oops, there's a conflict that pops up. And so those types of disagreements, they usually result from either not having a lot of communications, or sometimes it could be very defensive communications. And so, as a mediator and also a conflict resolution expert, I usually go in and try to promote conversations, very civil conversations, very respectful conversations. And I want to put a lot of emphasis on civility because I think that's so important in this day and age. That's awesome. And I heard another big word that you mentioned, respect, civility and respect. So the two of us, we met, I would say, a few years ago. We were listening into a conference call by the International Coaching Federation during the height of COVID. So everything was virtual. Right. And we met each other, we connected, and then we started meeting at Panera. Yeah, having a business meeting. So, and now fast forward, we both have fully launched our businesses. And I thought you would be a fantastic guest to share more about what you're doing and why conflict resolution is so important. So, tell us maybe what are some trends related to conflict resolution and conflict management that we need to know about? Yeah, it's interesting. It's a good question because all of us have noticed within this country the lack of civility. Civility has just changed. If you go to the grocery store, you may encounter some rude people, even the coffee shop. And what typically happens is what happens socially in our society transfers over into the workplace. Those behaviors, those attitudes sometimes come into the workplace, and that's when there are problems. Sometimes you encounter individuals who come in and they want to yell at another employee. And in most places, even though things have changed, yelling at someone is not acceptable. Um, Conflict is also important. You mentioned trends. I think with with conflict, I think organizations are beginning to recognize that it's important to have conflict resolution, to have mediation, because they've noticed the turnover in employment. And you've probably heard about wellness and psychological safety at work.
Absolutely.
And so I see a trend shifting where organizations are becoming more attuned to try to keep employees happy, their well-being, happy at work, because it results in turnover and lack of employee satisfaction, lack of morale.
Yeah, that's very important. And I'm definitely hearing more about wellness. It is a big topic. And what you said, trying to reduce the employee turnover. So and I feel a lot on the career coaching side. Definitely a couple of years ago, it was very hard for companies to fill roles.
Right.
So when you talk about retention, that's extremely important. Once you can get someone, you want to keep them,
Right.
and you want to maintain their well-being
Exactly.
and a very safe environment.
Right.
So tell me a little bit more about what's a key insight that you would like for people to understand about conflict resolution or management if this is a new topic for them?
Oh my gosh, conflict is so healthy.
Healthy.
Conflict is so
Healthy.
healthy
Wow.
because if you have the courage to have the conversation, you can resolve the issue immediately. And it's interesting that studying conflict for many years, men typically do it better than women.
Mm.
Studies have shown that sometimes when men have disagreements, they kind of nip it in the bud, they talk about it, they're done with it, move on. A woman, you have a conflict, they may resolve it, but they remember what happened 7 years ago. So we're a little bit different. We're a little bit different than we move on, but we're like elephants. We don't forget. And
Oh.
so in that way, we're a little bit different. But conflict is very healthy. That's what I would say, because it requires communications and sometimes it results in growth. I can reflect professionally on times I had a boss who was, kind of different. We didn't see things eye to eye. She was a visionary. I was just nail, dot the I's. And so we differed. But it was interesting in that relationship, we learned by communications to feed off each other's strengths. And it got to the point where we would actually visit each other's offices and say, I'm looking at it from this way. Share with me how you feel about this. And so it was an interesting thing. And even personally, I may have shared with you, I play golf, I enjoy golf. And so I played with this new person once who, yeah. And I never played with her before. And golf, you have etiquette. You have etiquette, that's what you do. So we played the, first hole teed off. And so she tells me, she says, well, take the golf cart and drive ahead. And I said, sure. I drove around to the first hole. And then when I got there, she just started yelling, why did you leave me? Why did you leave me? And I was like, and I was so confused. And of course, I was put off by her tone. And, the other two people we were playing with, they recognized it, of course, too, because it's just strange. So when the woman and I got back into the golf cart, I said, hey, I really didn't feel respected at that moment, in that moment. I don't understand why you raised your voice. Um, and she explained, she goes, oh, I thought you understood I wanted you to stay. And I said, I'm sorry for the misunderstanding. And so we talked about that. We cleared the air, and I laugh about it as a good example because I was actually practicing what I preach all the time: communicate, communicate. We later, when we finished playing golf, we all went to a Mexican restaurant. She sat beside me, and we had a ball. So that's why I say conflict can be very healthy. But just let me say one more thing.
Absolutely.
It's important with conflict, understanding your conflict style.
Say more, please.
And I give assessments, and I'm certified and trained to give assessments to people. So you can identify what is your conflict style. I a head-on person. If somebody's confronting me, I'm going to confront, very confrontational. I'm coming right back at them. Or if someone hits me with conflict, am I very passive and I'm just not going to say anything? Or do I have a conflict style where I try to compromise and negotiate? So there are different types of conflict. But the interesting thing about conflict is that people, even before I give the assessments, they usually have a general idea of how they respond in conflict. And
Absolutely.
it's interesting when conflict occurs, that's really when you see people's true character. That kind
I like that. I like that. First of all, I love all the points that you mentioned.
of.
I love that you said conflict is healthy.
Mhm.
And I heard you say it can lead to growth and our true selves come out a little bit more
Mhm.
in the heat of the moment
Well,
in conflict. So, what would you say to folks that are more conflict adverse?
to find the courage deep down within. It's interesting with conflict. I mentioned that we all have a core conflict style, but that may change. For example, I may be very passive if I'm in a shopping center and I'm driving and someone slips in and takes my parking space. Well, no big deal. But that confrontational part of me could come out, like if it involves a member of my family who's been harmed, like Mama Bear coming out. It's like, whoa, hold up.
It changes.
And so it shifts. So we have that ability to shift our confrontational, style or conflict style. For the ones that are conflict avoidant, I can say that the problem will not go away. The problem will not go. And that's
Mhm.
usually how conflict avoiders think, particularly in the workplace. They're like, well, I have an employee who is not performing, and so they'll get better. I'm sure they'll get better, you know. And so the employees making mistakes after mistakes, and then finally, maybe leadership hears something about it, then the pressure's on for them to have a conversation with that employee. And that's where I come in. With Lions HR Consulting, I can coach and give individuals the tools to help and have that conversation. And I've actually done that. I've met with leaders and I've kind of coached them on steps to take when they meet with employees.
I love it. I love it. So I'm very excited because in my career, I've definitely seen the different conflict styles.
Mhm,
And I've seen it in myself depending on the situation, what you just said. This
mhm.
depends. So I'm curious. I was looking back. What would you like to say to your younger self about what you do today?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. What I would say to my younger self is be confident, and speak up. It's interesting, personally, like most college students, you go through school. When you enter the workplace, you're not prepared for all the politics.
Absolutely.
And I take
Absolutely.
time actually with younger professionals to talk with them. And sometimes they'll say to me, they'll explain a situation and then I'll say, well, this is going to be the next step that this person tries with you. And then they'll come back later and say, Leigh, how did you know that? I was like, they're different people, but the politics, the political games, they're just the same.
Absolutely.
And once you understand the personalities, they're pretty much the same. But I think for my younger self to have more confidence and to speak out because I was very shy, very passive. And until I had more lived experiences behind me, work experience, that I built up that confidence to speak. And I've also fine-tuned my communication style, and I think that's important when you're trying to communicate. And it's okay to say that when you said, such and such in a meeting, it made me feel, right? It made me feel this way. In the future, I would appreciate it if you talk with me privately or if you not say anything, in a public setting in a meeting. And it's okay to do that. And so I've gotten the courage to do that. I just think it's important for young people to do it.
That's awesome. I smile when you say that because I can remember starting in my career and what you just said, I echo that.
Mhm.
Not knowing the politics and having to learn it and knowing what's acceptable, what's not, who you can talk to in the meeting,
Mhm.
who you should talk to one on one,
Mhm.
and sharing your preference of how people communicate back with
Well,
you.
things
It is
important.
extremely important. Um, so tell us, you talk to us about what you would tell your younger self.
Mhm.
Now, what made you decide to start your company? What motivated you?
What motivation was I feel like I have a talent, and this is just feedback from individuals. They're like, Leigh, you handled that mediation really well. I'm court certified by the Supreme Court of Virginia in mediation.
That's awesome.
And I get compliments from people. But what's interesting, you've heard people say this before, my career chose me, I didn't choose it. And I think that's true for me. I started my HR career in Atlanta, Georgia, and a wonderful woman named Campbell became my boss. She became my mentor as well. And she used to pull me into employee relations conflict type meetings. I was doing recruitment. And I was like, Joan, I'm happy. I'm doing recruitment. I'm hiring people for the agency. She's like, you have it. I was like, what is it? And so she would pull me in these employee relations meetings. And so that's when I started, but I did not take it seriously until midway in my career. And I realized that what she was talking about was my temperament, my communication style, my respect for people. I mean, I've talked to all types of people, people who were extremely angry, in cases where they've been terminated, they've thrown furniture around the room, and it takes a skill to learn how to de-escalate that.
Yes, it does.
Don't try this at home. Not everybody has that skill and technique, and hopefully our managers would not have to encounter that. But it takes a special person to know how to de-escalate and to move forward. And I'll tell you a funny story about that. The first time I did it, it was I was at a hospital in human resources, and this angry man. I mean, he was like 6'4", football player, comes in and he's cursing and he's screaming, and people are looking and he's cursing, and no one could understand what he wanted. So he comes into the lobby, and so I hear it. So I open the door to my office and I go out, and everybody's looking. And I said, "Sir, I can help you. And, I think I can help you." I still didn't understand what he wanted.
Right.
Um, at the same time, I nudged Kathy, who was our administrative assistant. I said, Kathy, will you call Mrs. Green and tell her I'm going to be late? I looked at the clock, like for our 2 o'clock appointment. And so he comes into my office. He's still raving, raving. And I couldn't understand what he was saying. So what I did was I had a pen. So I dropped the pen to the floor because they've shown that sometimes if you break a person from a high emotional state, sometimes that will draw their attention down. So that's what I did. And so he stopped talking. And so he watched me pick up my pen. And when I picked up the pen, the first thing out of my mouth was, I can help you. I think I can help you. What's going on? And so immediately he starts talking, my wife, my wife. I'm like, okay, I got that. He said, my wife was fired. Okay, I got that. My wife was a nurse here. Got that. And then I could see him starting to calm down because I was acknowledging him as he was speaking. So he starts calming down. And then I said, let me see what I can do for you. Because he said, I want to talk to the president of the company, and blah, blah, blah. And he was just still angry. So, but by the time, I listened to him, we walked back out of the office. Kathy was calling security, not Mrs. Green, because if you work in most places, you have a security code or something. Mrs. Green was our security code. So when I escorted him out, to make a long story short, security was present in the hallway. But for people to react to that, it takes a special skill set. And so that's what Joan Campbell met in Atlanta when she said, Leigh, you have it. Because I never would have imagined myself anything like that.
I applaud you. I applaud you. Because earlier you said courage,
Mhm.
and the other word that wanted to jump out was confidence.
Mhm.
Because of your training, you have
Mhm.
the confidence to
Right.
step into situations and help organizations and leaders and teams work through some challenging situations
Right.
and help them be successful. So I love the example you shared. I could visualize that person. And I just want to ask you, and I want to tell everyone once again, let me remind you, you're listening to Growing Perspectives with Kaisha. I am here today with a fantastic guest, and her name is Leigh Ryan. She has a very strong and experienced HR background, and she started her own company, and she specializes in conflict resolution, conflict management, and she's a certified mediator as well. And we've had a great time talking about her experiences. She told us why conflict management is important and the value. And for those that are adverse to conflict, she said it's not going away. So you do need to address it. So, Leigh, as we wrap up today, and I really enjoyed hearing more about why this field is so important, what you provide, and your expertise. Tell us, how can we stay connected with you? And what's
Sure.
new? Like, what else is going on with you?
Yeah. The way to contact me, first of all, I have a website and it's www.leigh, Leigh, R as in Robert, Lyons, Lyons.com. So leighrlyons.com. And so that will give everyone a preview of some of the services, because there are a variety of services other than conflict resolution, team building, team engagement, how to get people to work together. And that's why it's important for the assessments, to figure out what your style is and how you can work peacefully with other people. So that's one of the areas. Lots of services. And so in the future, I'm planning on giving just a mini workshop where I will talk about the assessments on conflict resolution for individuals who are interested in learning their conflict style.
Awesome. Well, once again, I want to thank you for being a guest on
Thank
Growing
you.
Perspectives with Kaisha. And I look forward to staying connected with you.
Yeah,
And I know Mike King, he was joking earlier with us around, place where a lot of business folks go to meet up. So we have to meet up soon
that's right.
for coffee.
For coffee.
That's right. Thank you, everyone, and have a
Thank
great day.
you.
Hi, it's Kaisha McCrae. I'm excited to share that I have a new radio show, and it is Growing Perspectives with Kaisha. I invite you to listen in and join us. We will have guests that will share with us their successful career transitions and their growth. We're going to have stories, we will share resources, and we're going to have a great time. So, once again, listen in to Growing Perspectives with Kaisha, and you can follow me on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. Kaisha McCrae.